Perfect. So just going ahead and kicking it off today, there's a couple of things that we want to chat about. So looking at what we have remaining from a topic standpoint, we have line items that are remaining, as well as today we're going to be stepping into reporting and optimization. So those are two very hot topics that I do want to spend some time on. But I know we're a little bit behind on our agenda based on the last 2 weeks. So we're going to just finish off on line items and then we will hop into the other topics. And then from there, we'll go into questions. And then following in the next meeting, what we're going to be doing is if we aren't able to get to reporting or optimization, we'll just finish up on that note. And then we'll have some time to, do some hands-on live training or actually just discuss anything, any remaining questions that anyone might have. Awesome. So let's hop into one of the orders really quickly to still start building a line item. Just for some reference, what we've been chatting about the last couple of weeks is really, the structure of the DSP campaign, right? We built the creatives, we built the audiences, we built the orders. Now the line item is really that last step of this whole picture in compiling everything, right? And the order that I actually shared is the preferred order in which we need to build it in. Creatives and audiences are two elements within DSP that do require additional moderation approval. So it takes time to populate, right? A lot of people, like one mistake I see happening very often is, everyone gets really excited. They start building the orders, they start building the line items right away after that, but then they don't have any creatives or audiences prepped up. So that's really the holding pattern in that case. But because we've done all of that already, we started with the orders and then the audience and then creatives, we can now actually go into any orders and start building out some line items. So let me go into, let's just click on one of these random ones here. I'm going to choose an in-market one since those are a bit simpler. So every order will have 6 line items within them, right? And just some context on the line items. I briefly remember that one of the earlier conversations that we've had from a training session was talking about how DSP is structured, and it's actually very similar to the way that sponsored brands is created. You have your banners, you have your keyword or targeting. So now, once we're tying in all this together, it's going to make a lot more sense within this. So a couple of things to note from a line item standpoint. We recommend every order to have at least 6 line items, right? Every order has at least 6 line items. And the key differences in here are the different device types we're serving on, as well as the different supply sources. So it's a commingling of that combination. The reason why we do that actually is because we are able to more granularly approach the optimization process, right? On the flip side, if we had one order and only one line item, we wouldn't be able to see the data as clearly in terms of, which device type we're targeting, which source we are going after. And it just gets really muddy. And you can't really use the data efficiently to optimize that type of data. So if you split it out like this, you're able to have a more granular control to be able to make that type of change for each line item. So there's going to be 6 different combinations. The first one is desktop O&O, right? That one's fairly self-explanatory. It's serving on a desktop, and it's going to be on the owned and operated source, right? So that's like Amazon.com. It's anything that Amazon owns. The second one is desktop APS/3P, and you'll see that in these first 2 parameters right here. So desktop O&O is right here. The next one is desktop APS and 3P. This is where you're starting to target more offsite inventory, weather.com, yahoo.com, except you're not going into the line items to select every one of these sites. You're mainly going into the different exchanges, selecting them, and then those exchanges will automatically help you bid on those sources, right? So if you want to select one exchange that you're familiar with, that's great. We just make it a habit of selecting all the exchanges and then optimizing the sites from there. So that is offsite. Mobile web, APS and 3P is the same thing, except now you're not on a desktop. You're still targeting the same type of inventory, but now you're on devices, right? You're on a mobile device. And then the next one after that is mobile web O&O. So as you can see, it's kind of a combination of desktop or mobile web. So you're either on O&O or you're either on APS. And then the last parts of that combination is mobile app, APS and 3P, and then mobile app O&O. So mobile app O&O is basically your Amazon mobile shopping app, right? Mobile app, APS, and 3P. If you use any apps that like to monetize their product, you'd likely see these small banner ads always pop in, or pop-up ads / videos. That is the mobile app, APS, and 3P inventory. I'll pause there for a quick sec. Any questions here? All right, perfect. So moving into one, I'll go ahead and just click into the desktop O&O, since that's usually the most common one. And then I'll walk you through how this was built out. So I'm glad this new UR interface rolled out after or while we're doing this training than before, because they actually just made the switch about a month or two ago. The DSP interface looked completely different. All the elements were more or less about the same, but the way that things were structured was just different. We would have to have gone through a whole retraining just to look at it again. So I'm glad everything's updated and finalized in that note. So starting from top to bottom, the type up here is where you select what type of lines you want to build, right? There's static banners, which is usually the most common one, or static or DEAs, where you're going from, where you're targeting very common sizes like the 300 by 250s, all those different elements. That's where you would change that, right? So we'll send you a list on like whether or not you use standard display, Amazon mobile display. Unfortunately, once you build out the line item, you can't really select it anymore and change it. All right, so just a note to pay close attention to as you're building it out, just to make sure those combinations are correct. But within here, if you wanted to also build out online video campaigns, Fire Tablet, streaming TV, Twitch, the top portion here is the area to denote what type of campaigns you want to build, right? Imagine if you're in search and you hit new campaigns, this is equivalent to selecting a sponsored brands or a sponsored products or a sponsored display. And that's what the line item here is to define for you. The names, there's the naming conventions we'll send out to you so that you know how to structure this best to read all that data. From a line item ID perspective, you can actually put in comments or external IDs or POs if you want. Majority of the time, we don't really touch this. So I can go ahead and just hide that really quickly. And then moving forward from a product standpoint, this is where you want to select what type of products you're advertising. It's not really going to affect the campaign itself, but very similar to some of the other points that I made in the previous sessions, Amazon likes to classify it. So, when they pull benchmarks, they categorize all of that using the data that you input into here, right? So not important for us, but important for Amazon. They're not going to let you build a line item by just bypassing this one. So I would recommend just putting in whichever category is relevant to yours. And then from a supply source standpoint, this is where you will have some form of variation moving from line item to line item, right? So as I mentioned, there's the O&O and there's also the APS and 3P. So O&O, typically what we select, that was weird. What we select generally is just Amazon up here. Sometimes we would select IMDb, but it's definitely worth a test to see whether or not that performs well. Anytime you move outside of O&O inventory, generally your performance is going to decline, right? Because they're not on that shopping mood anymore. They're not on Amazon.com. And this is where DSP really starts kicking into high gear, is when you're starting to select all these open exchanges, right? I have seen some surprising data before that 3P does perform better than O&O. I'm not sure if we're just chalking that up to a coincidence, but I would highly recommend just targeting all 6 and optimizing from there, right? So O&O, you would select Amazon or Amazon IMDb, but then for APS and 3P, if I were to click on another line item, you'd see that these 2 are unchecked and then the rest of these are checked off. And then as you're optimizing, we can get into this a little bit later. You can start deselecting certain exchanges that aren't performing well, or you can just actually exclude sites within each of these exchanges. And I'll show you how to do that as well. From a targeting standpoint, this is where you effectively check desktop or mobile. we will always avoid desktop and mobile web because that will defeat the purpose of having that many line items. The whole goal of splitting it out that way is so that you can either select desktop or select mobile web. If in the type up here, I choose like a mobile app instead, this option wouldn't even be here, and it would just give you the option to select a mobile shopping app. From an audience standpoint, this is where it starts getting a little bit interesting and probably where you're going to be spending most of your time from a line item standpoint. So what you want to do is click into change. And then this view that you see here is effectively every single audience that's built within your advertiser, right? I'll repeat that one more time. Every single audience that's within your advertiser. So this is important because when you build out different advertisers, right, you want to be able to understand whether or not you want those audiences to be ported over, right? If it's more strategic for you to create custom audiences and utilize that across multiple product groups within your brand, you would probably want to have them under one advertiser instead of splitting them out, right? Case in point, right now we're building out iOvate, which is the new brand. And recently I've just been having some discussions internally on, really just talking through, should we, because iOvate has multiple businesses under them, right? Should we have them each as separate advertisers, or should we just have iOvate as the advertiser and be more clear on an order level perspective? That is where we want to break down the different product groups or businesses. And that's what we ended up doing, because the conclusion we made was there's likely going to be a lot of overlapping audiences, and we don't want to recreate one for every single advertiser. All right, so for all that said and done, if you recall back into the audience part of the training, this should look fairly similar. There were drop-downs where you can select through on the different audiences that have been pre-built, the ones that are custom that you made, and it had some additional detail like display eCPMs and etc. This gives you similar types of information. It'll give you some impression estimates from a daily perspective. That way you can kind of gauge how big your audience size is. For some of the pre-built segments, I don't think they give you estimates, or for the custom segments, they don't give you the estimates, only because they just don't have that functionality yet, right? But that's up to kind of us as the users to test whether or not they are viable audiences. If we've vetted the ASINs that we put into the audiences, we already know those are very targeted folks. Generally, your audience size isn't going to be as big as the pre-built one. So take that with a grain of salt when you're building things out. I mean, when you're building remarketing lines or you're building out conquesting lines, those are probably 99% of the times where you would actually build out a custom segment altogether. And that is going to appear into the section here. So as you can see here, baby food is a in-market segment that we're currently targeting, right? And in-market usually stands for anyone who's been browsing, anyone who's been searching, clicking on product detail pages of what Amazon categorizes as baby food. And that behavior will occur from a rolling 30-day basis. That's what Amazon says. If you look around Amazon, I don't think they define that, or they may have released that. But within 30 days of that behavior, you're going to be retargeting any of those shoppers who have gone through those actions. But of course, baby food is a huge audience, right? Like, how do you determine whether or not they're still in market for something like this? Well, this is where exclusion comes into play, right? Remember how in the audience I was saying, when you create an audience of ASINs, you probably want to create the views, the purchases, the similar product views, and then the searches, right? So you have essentially all 4 different variations of that. This is where it starts coming into handy. Because we're targeting an in-market segment here, this is a pre-built one, we also want to negative out anyone who's recently made a purchase within the last 30 days, right? The state, you can change it, right? So if I search 30 days, I can guarantee that there's a lot more products or a lot more segments that we built out that was, that just had a lot of variation. So most of these are 30 days. That's generally the standard to get things approved. But on occasion, when your audience is too small, you want to increase that look back window to like 60 or 90 days to test that as well. And they're not set on those intervals. You can do 31 days, 32 days, what have you. But most of these are 30 days. If I scroll, actually, that's not going to help. If I do 60 days, you can see that we also built some segments that were purely for 60 days. And then there were some for 90 days, just to increase that size as well. So in general, most of the baby food that we work with, based on data that we've seen, subscribe and save metrics, we know that the refresh rate is about 30 days. So we want to exclude anyone who's already made a purchase. But if they're in market again, and the last time they made a purchase was 30 days ago, on the 31st day, they fall out of the segment and they will start continuing to see this ad. Right. Very important concept, because exclusion on audience is equivalent to on search building up negative keyword lists. These are people that are likely irrelevant, people that you probably don't want to target anymore because they would continue to use your ad spend. So very important for almost any segment that, like any type of objective you're running. If you're doing any kind of remarketing, you're remarketing to folks, but if they made a purchase recently in the last like 15 to 30 days, you probably don't want to see, like, have them see the ad again, or else they will just continue to get bombarded until they fall out of the inclusion window. Pause there for a sec. Any questions?
Yeah, I apologize. I missed it when you were clicking. How did you get to this section where you're going through and able to kind of view all the different audiences?
Yeah, great question. So it's actually a pop-out window. They've changed that recently. It used to just show up all in this middle section, but you now have to click into change, and then that's going to help pop this out.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions?
Hey, Ryan, maybe I missed this last week. And just, did you show everyone how to create the audience, like a create the audience from scratch, or are you going to do that?
Yep. So we did share that last week. I could go into a little bit more detail if that's something that we all want as well.
I leave it up to us. Like, I'm sorry. I was like, I know that was part of the training last week. I just wanted to make sure I did
All good.
that wasn't on. Was everyone good on creating your own audiences and then finding it within the target audience here? I'm gonna assume yes, since no one's talking.
Cool. That's usually my go-to indication as well. Awesome. But, of course, if there's any other questions, like, feel free to reach out. I'm always more than happy to answer. And this is also why we create audiences before we do line items, because once you do create it, it will take some time to pop into here. I am glad we're doing this training here today instead of 3 years ago, because it used to take about 48 hours for an audience to even appear in your line item after you create it. So there was a lot of forward planning that needed to be done, a lot of timing and expectation that needed to be set. But now I've seen some as early as like 15 minutes. So it's like pretty much instantaneous, which is awesome. Cool. So all that said and done, you can tell by this point, there's a lot of planning that needs to be had when you're strategizing what campaigns you want to be built. When you're thinking about conquesting, you not only have to think about, okay, how many campaigns am I building, but you have to think about what audiences I want to target, which ASINs I want to go after, what brands I want to go after. And then you have to add a second point to that, kind of like keyword search. You have to think about all the people that you want to exclude. Are you going to exclude people from just your brand, just competitor brands, or are you going to exclude everyone who's in that category, right? Because the logic there, if I clicked into a remarketing campaign, you would be able to see this, but the logic flow is if someone has seen our product, right, and we're trying to remarket against them, we would have that as part of the inclusion audience up here. And then we would actually exclude not just our brand, but we would exclude competitor brands as well, because we won't know exactly what the consumer ends up purchasing. So we want to just make sure, hey, just because they saw our page doesn't mean that they're going to buy our products. What if they saw our page and ended up buying a competitor product, right? We won't want them to continue to get bombarded with our brand until they need to replenish their supply of baby food, right? So in general, you will see segments like all baby food, excluding our brand as well as competitor brands, just to make sure we have very holistic coverage of targeting someone who's actually still in market and not someone who's already made a purchase, right? I wish there was even more granular ways of understanding, someone who may still be in market even though they purchased, but that's getting way ahead of ourselves. And that's something that I've shared with Amazon that probably won't be coming down the pipeline until their behavioral analysis gets better, in my opinion. Any questions here? Awesome. One last thing I will say, actually, Jacob, I saw you muted. Did you have a question? We can't quite hear you. I don't think the audio is working,
No,
but
I was
okay.
gonna say I didn't have a question.
Oh,
It just kept on moving.
okay.
So I'm like, cool.
All good. Thank you. Appreciate that. So one last point that I wanted to make, I keep adding things, apologies for that. But if you wanted to, let's just say exclude multiple audiences. Now, why would you do that? Why would you want to exclude multiple audiences? Well, let's say when you built out certain audiences for purchases, you have your segment that you built out for, like 30-day Gerber baby food purchasers, and you also built out, another brand like competitor A's baby food 30-day purchasers, but you don't have an all baby food, right? Because you would have to do this separately. What you could actually do is something like this. Let me go look for this exact segment. I think it should be in here. Gerber 30 days. Cereal purchasers. Baby foods. Just looking at that real quick. So it's not quite in here, but I can just show you an example. I'm going to copy this and save this so that I will remember that this was the target. So what I'm trying to show you is how do you set up an overlapping audience? Let's just remove this one really quickly. So let's take any category actually, and we'll take the purchasers of baby snacks, right? So to add in a exclusion, you want to hit not, right? This little checkbox right here, hit add. And then let's just say you wanted to exclude someone else. Organic snacks, let's include this as well. So the logic here is very, very important, and this will definitely determine how big your audience size actually is. I keep zooming in, but right here for group 2, you can see that there is not this and not that, right? So let's think about, let's go back to high school real quick. Let's think about how this Venn diagram looks. It's counterintuitive, right? I made this mistake probably my first couple of months of running DSP, and I was noticing that my audience sizes were still really big, and I feel like people who fell into these not segments were still being targeted. And I reached out to Amazon, and what I found out was that logic is technically inverted, where if you wanted to target people who, bought baby snacks or they bought organic snacks, right? If they bought either or and we want to exclude them, the operator is actually an and, not an or. Right? I'll repeat that one more time. The operation for something like this is an and, not an or, which is complete opposite of what you think would be true, right? Like if you're trying to target someone who's, like had any of these snacks or purchased any of these snacks and you want to exclude them both, you actually have to put an and segment. So I'll pause there. Any questions on that?
You have to put an and segment?
Yes. Yeah.
So right now, this will only exclude people who fall into both of these knots, correct?
That's correct.
And do they offer any other Booleans? Any other operators?
The only other one is any, which is or.
Okay.
I know it's frustrating.
Just give us the full logic. Okay, noted.
For sure. So this,
I did have one question. When you did your search and you just had Gerber in it, I noticed like some of the audiences were like highlighted. Is that overlap or is that affinity?
That's a good question. Which part did you see highlighted?
It may not come up now because you had changed like the group 1, but like it actually showed like some highlighted and there were different levels. I didn't know if that was like an overlap estimate.
Are you talking about something like this?
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Great question. So these aren't overlaps per se, but they are impression volume. So I know this is a common question from brands. They'll ask like, hey, what's our audience size? Like how many people can we actually reach? This will give you like a forecasted daily impressions if you hover over them.
Oh, interesting. I was curious why those were highlighted and the other ones weren't. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like we still don't know till today why custom audience segments aren't. My best guess is it's probably just too small for Amazon to put in that functionality. Because I mean, how many shoppers are searching or actually purchasing Gerber baby snacks, right? I mean, we can look at the Vendor Central to get a gauge on how big this audience is, but I doubt it's, to the tune of like 1 million or 100 million impressions.
100 million. Okay.
Yeah. So that bar would be like abysmally small, if anything. Cool. Awesome. So just wanted to share this logic with you. I would say if there is any takeaway from today's call, this is probably the most important one and can really make or break the delivery rates of your campaigns just based on how these are set up. So the last thing we would want is for, anyone to, any of their brands to come back and ask like, hey, why aren't our performance doing too well? And, that's kind of a reason we didn't exclude enough. So I'll just add this back. In very rare occasions, you can have multiple groups into here. There's really no reason to add new audience groups, to be honest. If we want to layer on audiences to say, let's say we want to target anyone who's purchased a baby food and they've also purchased, I don't know, baby toddler clothing. That's the first thing that came to my mind. So, or baby and toddler toys. You can just actually add this segment. After you click into here, you'll see this group 1 box is highlighted. You'll hit add into there and you can change the operator to or and as well, right? Or is definitely a much bigger audience. But if you wanted to qualify your audiences even more to say, I want to really make sure that, this person definitely has a baby and not buying baby food as a gift, right? And the more you're able to subsection it like this, the more granular your audience will get, but that's going to limit your servability. Most of the times, I would say you really wouldn't utilize something like that until you're going very upper funnel. And there's also different parameters, just kind of moving forward here on how you can limit something like that. So trying to think of an example. There's different targeting options you have here. Only a handful are checked because this is only what we're going through. But if you wanted to target specifically different operating systems like iOS or Android, we used a subsection like that. We realized that didn't make a difference, so we keep that unchecked. Regions is an interesting one. You can select different regions, but in general, most of our brands are US based only, and they also only sell on US. So that's why we only serve it to them, right? This DSP is going to click through back into Amazon US. So selecting anything else doesn't really make sense. Audiences, we just covered that in pretty deep depth. Location targeting is a pretty big one as well. I would say location targeting is very useful for seasonal products. If you wanted to incorporate like in-store strategies, if you have retailers or regional accounts that are able to, share any kind of data with you, I can see that being very useful here. Like postal code targeting is pretty interesting. We work with a brand, they sell car wash kits. And even though you might think car wash kits aren't very seasonal because people wash their cars all the time, but for those folks living in the East Coast during the middle of winter, they're probably not washing their car, right? But the conundrum there is that this brand still wants to stay top of mind to a lot of consumers. So what do they end up doing? Well, they ended up sectioning based on like a weather pattern, where when you are around like winter time frame, you're really just primarily targeting California and Florida and some of the other southern states where it's still a bit warm, where car wash kits people are still relatively in market. But as you're approaching March, April, May timeframe, that's when you can start layering in like postal codes and regions that get warmer and warmer. That way they can be more in market. And you would layer this onto like a streaming TV, OTT, like an online video, very upper funnel lifestyle strategy or like in-market strategy. That way you can qualify your audience. In general, I don't really see a need to overlap this against pre-built audiences because those are very, very granular already, right? Regardless of what region you're in, if you visited a product detail page, that shows me intent regardless, right? So let's just say you are Gerber baby food. I mean, I can try to optimize by regions. I would probably improve performance marginally. But if I can see that this person has already gone to the product detail page, viewed it not once, but multiple times, well, they are a prime audience regardless of what region they're in, right? So that's kind of the argument on how and when you should use location targeting. Alternatively, if you are selling a very high price point item, let's just say you are selling a $5,000 TV, like a QLED TV, right? Those types of razor thin new tech televisions that range from $5,000 to $10,000. I don't know if you'll ever have any brands in the future like that, but you can actually go after certain postal codes based on demographics. Like, let's just say I wanted to go 90210 Beverly Hills. That would be a great postal code to target for, high income demographics. See, we get the reference there.
I appreciated it.
No, all good. That's what I'm here for. Be here all day. So day parting, moving in from location targeting, this is where it starts getting a little interesting too. If you are running low on media dollars and you don't want to be serving in the middle of the night, and you only want to serve from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 8 p.m., 9 p.m., you can do that. All you would do is just highlight those sections. You can even change the viewer's time zones or your account time zones just so you can see. But Amazon's going to automatically adjust for those time zones as well. Right. We tried to implement this as best as we can for budgets that are a little bit more limited. And there are like different audience insights and data that I'm sure you can find all throughout Amazon's reporting, which shows that there's less efficacy in serving from like a 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. Right. One thing, so that's about it from a day parting standpoint. But as I'm kind of moving into the next one area that I've been bugging Amazon for is a click-through rates per hour. I know in some reports they give you like a conversion rates, but that doesn't really matter anyway, because the conversions trace back to like the click or the view, the last click, last touch attribution. But what would be more impactful is if click-through rates, we can prove that it's dropped off from 12 to 6 a.m. That's a very certain case that you should negative that out, right? But they don't have that data today. I'll keep you all posted if they do ever honor this request. I think it's just more powerful than any other data points out there at the moment. So we don't have location and day part. I can just remove those real quick. And then continuing down the list, you have language and IAB content categories. Languages, if you wanted to just do English and Spanish, you can do that. But unless you're selling very Spanish catered products, I would just keep it towards English since it's one or the other. And then for IAB content categories, want to spend a little bit of time on this one because we recently got some news. If you all were, reading the news about a week or two ago, you saw the unfortunate shooting out in New York. And unfortunately, the way I found out was that I had an Amazon rep reach out to me to say, hey, in light of, the events that happened in New York, we know that brands probably don't want to show up for content like that. So we should exclude that type of content, that type of news, right? Anything that's negative press, we don't want our brands associated to it. IAB content categories is where you would effectively change all of that. So, I mean, if I go into any of these sections, you can see if you don't want to be associated to anything, and usually politics is a very big one. Politics, gambling, drugs, those are probably the big three that you don't want to show up for. You can actually click that and negative those out. Trying to see where that is. Law, government, and politics, right? So you can just really make sure, some of those aren't appearing here. Off Amazon and web only. I see. There's another section here that actually shows up that is when you click onto APS and 3P. As a reminder, we're currently on O&O. So Amazon already doesn't have that on their site. That's why they don't give you that option to target. But if I do hop into an APS and 3P, there are certain sections where you can exclude news sources like that. Here's another section that I would actually take a look at even more. You can ignore the IAB content categories. This is where it's going to actually confirm the choices of what you want to add and remove into there. So let's talk like IAS real quick. This is a really common one. IAS is helps with the brand safety guidelines just to make sure you're not serving on those types of those areas. So for example, anything that's adult, anything that's alcohol, etc. Amazon already does a really good job of excluding this. But if you just want to be extra safe and extra certain, you can go ahead and exclude that audience. So let's just say offensive language, exclude anything that's high risk, high or moderate risk. IAS has their own way of classifying all of this, and that's how they would go about, limiting the servability on those areas. But as I mentioned, Amazon's very safe about this, because if someone does, see an ad of an Amazon DSP ad and they screenshot that, blast it on Twitter, not only is the brand freaking out, but Amazon's going to be freaking out by even serving on like a source like that. So that's why I would say that's an area that I would say is worth an extra look. And then taking a look at these last couple of ones, there's also contextual targeting. Contextual targeting is another strategy, kind of like remarketing, conquesting, in-market lifestyle. The only difference is that contextual can only serve on O&O sources, right? Desktop, mobile web, mobile app, 3 line items. If you hit this contextual button, you would not want to include any audiences at all, right? Contextual basically already does that for you. This is useful for when someone's actively browsing for a product and they're looking to make a purchase. There are different DSP banners that's available on Amazon.com, where if they are on those content, Amazon's going to automatically recognize exactly what type of content that is, what type of ads you're serving, what type of ASINs you have in these, and actually showcase your ad while they're serving. So whereas the audience is a bit more qualified in the sense that we know that people have done that historically, right? It's like in the past behavior. Contextual is in the moment behavior to target. So that's usually a strategy on its own, and that's why we're not clicking it here. Our audiences suffice, but if we ever need to like increase the pacing of an order, we would include contextual targeting in there. So there was a lot from a targeting standpoint. I'll just pause there real quick. Any questions? Awesome. Moving on to the next section, we want to go ahead and look at the start and end dates. Generally, start and end dates, you want to match that with what your flight is currently at. So let's say right now our flight is from April 1st to April 30th. In general, you want to change the end date of your flight to the end date of the order budget, right? So whatever we have here, and let's just say that's $5,000, we want to set the end date of this delivery to end on April 30th for that $5,000. Because what I have seen in the past, and this does affect servability, is if your end date extends all the way to December 31st, the DSP line item is actually going to think you have $5,000 to spend all the way to the end of December, right? It's strange because I have seen some campaigns pushed out to December that still serve properly, right? They will serve to what you put in the order flight budget. But in general, for the best chance of servability in the most accurate sense, you want to set your end dates to match what the current month that you're in or the current flight that you're currently doing for your order. 2 options here. There's an automatically optimized budget and there's a manually set. Automatically is going to take those 6 line items, and whichever performs the best, it's going to make that update and change for you. Manually set, you're going to have to input a budget every single time for every one of your line items. I don't recommend this. I would recommend you optimizing it. That way it can, look at what performance KPIs you have there. It's whether it's ROAS, click-through rates, etc. And it's going to look at those line items and optimize and put more of your investment towards one more than the other based on that performance. Not to mention, if you do end up changing your budgets on the order, you're going to have to redistribute the manual. You're going to have to redistribute it if you collect on the manual. So just a note there. You can also set a budget cap on a daily or a monthly. You can also do that on the order level, right? So I probably wouldn't recommend touching this. If you really wanted to cap your budgets, do it on the order level, because your line item is going to just distribute itself and it's never going to spend past what you have from a restriction standpoint on the order side. From a pacing standpoint, we've been a bit torn about this. Usually, sometimes your campaigns might pace a bit slowly. So you would want to set up a catch-up boost. Amazon, for some reason, they're deprecating this in the next couple of months. I just got word of it last week. So I would recommend just setting a none catch-up boost for now, because the system isn't working like it is supposed to. That's just my insider information on this. I would recommend just setting it up to none for now, and that's going to help your order pace correctly. From a fee standpoint, unlike search, there's a lot of fees that go into the DSP. There's audience fees, there's supply fees, there's source fees, there's your platform fees, and a lot of different things. So in reality, your actual media spend is a lot lower than what it's supposed to be, right? My advice to everyone here is that brands typically don't need to know that there's so many fees. That's just going to cause a lot more confusion over to them. So in general, what Amazon has done historically is that they just bake in these fees, right? They would bake in the fees into the eCPM. So unless you're pulling reporting to split that all out, you won't really see it. You would just see that, your agency fees are taken out from the order level, and the rest is history, right? The rest is going to be put towards helping this campaign run. And then last but not least, from a frequency standpoint, you probably never want to uncap your frequency. I'm sure some of you has had your fair share of poor targeting from brands out there. Case in point, I was browsing on Slick Deals one day and I saw Le Creuset ad 30 times within the same browsing time, right? It wasn't even the same day. It was like within that same session, I saw 30 ads, right? I probably cost them a good chunk of money because I didn't end up buying anything. I didn't end up clicking anything either. So you generally want to limit it. You can limit things on a line item level, but I would recommend you limit it on an order level as well, because order level, if you had a frequency cap of 5:1, but then for your 6 line items, you had a frequency cap of 5:1 each, it's going to choose 5 impressions for each from either of the line items, and it's only going to serve a maximum of 5 per day per person if you have that restriction on the order level. Right. The recommendation Amazon has made is about 7 on the order level, but during tentpole events, they do recommend you to push it up to like 14 and above, right? Rare instances, they'll tell you to uncap frequency. I would just say use your best judgment on whether or not you're selling a product that, would be okay with uncapping their frequency. They're few and far between, but it does happen. And then last but not least, base bids. In general, I think I touched on this before, depending on your inventory source, if you're serving on like static or standard display, if you're serving videos, OTT, streaming TV, like Twitch, those have all different recommended base supply bids. I would say for standard display, hovering between, $3 to $10 is pretty average from what I see. And that's the base, keep in mind. For online video, that's between 10 to 20. Twitch is between 15 to 25. And streaming TV is between 20 to 30. We've seen that exceed 30 before from an eCPM standpoint, but this is where you would go ahead and set it. If you wanted to cap your bid, you can also put that into here. But if I hover over the side, it's going to tell me if I don't cap anything, it's just going to automatically double it based on how aggressive some of the other folks are betting out there. So with blank, the maximum bid is double the base bid. And that is it from building a line item standpoint. You have to do this, but 6 times for every order, right? But from an efficiency standpoint, one thing that's great about this is that you can actually copy the orders with the line items and the creatives as you're building it, and all you have to change out is the targeting. There's also bulk operations that's going to help save you a ton of time, a functionality that Amazon came out with sometime last year. But all that said and done, this is one line item, and we're not quite finished yet. We do have to exit this page, but now we put in the targeting. Now we have to input what creatives we want to associate to this line item. So creatives are associated from a line item level. You want to add or remove creative up here anytime you want to make a change. And then it's going to pop you into a window like this, right? So another testament of why you want to build out creatives first, because if you don't, you're going to have to end up, building those out while you're building your line items. And just from a workflow standpoint, going back and forth is probably not ideal. But taking a look at all these, right, you can associate your creatives of the different sizes of which you've created into here. Currently, there is only one creative associated to this, and that is a responsive e-commerce. So if you recall, there's a dynamic e-commerce, which is like that banner that dynamically changes. You associate one ASIN to it, that drives to the product detail page, and it's going to show like flip between your brand name and your product. RECs, we only have one because we can actually input up to 20 ASINs into here, and it's going to automatically rotate based on performance. The drawback is you cannot see the performance of each of those ASINs in a creative like this. So if granularity is important to you, I'd recommend creating multiple dynamic e-commerce creatives and associating that instead. So you'd have a pretty full list here instead of just one REC. Any questions there?
Is there a limit to like how many you can create? Like if the client has a, if the client has a large catalog, like do you put all their ASINs in, or do you only put like top ASINs in?
That's a great question. So I would say defer to your, I would say that depends on the agency's judgment in that case. For us, we've worked with apparel brands before, and trust me when I say this, like hundreds of thousands of ASINs is not uncommon for apparel ASINs, right? When you consider the size variations, the color variations. So in that case, we're not going to build one out for every one of them. I mean, I would say that's insane. We'd probably need like a full-time team just to build out creatives. But in those cases, building out a responsive e-commerce makes a lot more sense. So for us, I would recommend setting the boundary with your brand to say, hey, just because we want everyone to get a good amount of servability, like we can do some math behind this too. For every creative here, let's just say per ASIN, we have 7 creatives, right? If we have 5 ASINs, that's 35 creatives. If your budget is 10K for the month, right, and you divide that by 30 days, you're spending about $333 per day. Does it make sense for us to spend about $10 per creative? Probably not, right? So with higher budgets, I think you can be a little bit more flexible. But I think if you are working with a relatively low budget, doing an REC, putting everything in it together, especially if the brand isn't necessarily asking for that type of granularity, that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Great question. Cool. So I'll just pause there. And that is everything from a line item perspective. So as you can see here, line item actions, when you are done with building this out, for example, you just hit copy creatives and then you can build out the other line items, change up the settings to, to do like desktop APS and 3P now. And then that's when you can, that can help expedite your workflow. And worst case scenario, if you did have any further questions at all, you can always ask me. One thing that I've used to do in the past was I just click into like orders and I would look at the different creatives or look into the different line items, see what settings are different and see which creatives are associated to each individual ones, because that's going to make an impact too, right? In the spec sheet that I sent over to you, there are some desktop specific creatives and there are some mobile web specific creatives. And there are some mobile app specific creatives. So depending on the line item you build, there's actually different creatives you put into it. If you do dynamic, you actually don't have to worry about that because that all will just automatically populate into there. But if you're doing like a custom image, for example, that's where it makes a difference, right? Amazon just has its own classification on how they want or how big your creative size should be or your file weight. And that's what's going to affect whether or not you can serve on desktop, mobile app, or mobile O&O. Would it be helpful if I just click through all of that really quickly to show you, or would it be more helpful if we just moved on to reporting and optimization?
My vote's about reporting and optimization. But
okay. Yeah, same.
Okay, cool. You got it. So we'll go ahead and that there from a line item perspective, we'll go ahead and pop into optimization. So let's see which one. With the couple of minutes we have left, I'll go through optimization and save reporting for the next call. Optimization is a bit of a quicker topic, so we can touch on that really quickly. So there are 2 different types of optimizations you make that are going to be, that's going to take up like 95% of your time. The first optimization, ironically, is not about performance, but the first optimization is about pacing, right? For pacing in search, you probably just add in additional keywords, add in some campaigns, put in some keywords, and it serves almost immediately. DSP, however, is a different beast on its own. Building out new orders, sometimes they don't serve right away, sometimes they require a little bit more traction. So you wouldn't be able to evaluate the pacing of an actual order that you just built out until at least a couple of days after you build up a campaign. Becomes very problematic when you're like underpacing towards the end of the month and you need to build out another campaign. You will not know whether or not you're going to hit the full budget. So essentially, that's a really important aspect, right? So I'm here to help you understand how can you increase pace? What are some different ways? So the first thing that you want to go into is probably click into an order that you see might not have a strong delivery rate, right? I will go into here and you can see that the delivery rate is like 49%, 33%. Ideally, your delivery rate is about 100%. If you're 100% to pace, you're golden. You don't have to make any adjustments there. All you have to do is optimize the campaigns. But from a pacing standpoint, if you're under, there's a couple of things that you can do. The first thing you can do is add more orders, right? Look at your strategy, and the sheets that you're tracking it. What additional strategy have you been wanting to implement, right? If it's another in-market segment, lifestyle segment, that's when I would build out a separate order, input more targeting, and have that run. Or another scenario is if you didn't want to build out another order, what you can do is actually click into like a line item like this. And then you can actually add additional segments into here to increase your audience size. That's probably the biggest reason why you're underpacing. If your audience size is correct, there should be almost no reason. That's why in-market and lifestyle generally paces a lot better than custom segments. Custom segments will be the bane of your existence from a servability standpoint because they don't give you daily impressions. You don't know exactly how much you can serve from it, and that's going to ruin the allocation. So any media plans that you send out, you're likely going to have to change that based on your optimizations here. So as I mentioned, if baby formula, let's just say that isn't big enough, I can incorporate additional baby items into here, put an or segment, right? Just so I don't qualify the audience as much, I can increase that segment to help out with that as well. What you can also do from a segment standpoint is like, let's just say you had a view segment, right? Let's just change this to a custom segment really quickly. You did a 30-day product views. If that's not big enough, what you can actually do is increase the date here, increase the window here, right? So if you did a 90-day, well, your audience size suddenly increased by almost twofold, right? It's 3 times as big now. So generally your audience is bigger, so you can serve more. I'm a little bit hesitant on that on occasion because if it doesn't make sense for your product to continue targeting someone for 90 days, they will continue to see that ad over and over and over again until that 91st day where they fall out of that segment. So I would say use your best judgment on that. Changing the look back window isn't the best, but that does help with servability as well. You can remove negative audiences. We've seen this before. We don't really recommend it because kind of like keyword targeting, you're not going to remove negative keywords that you think aren't relevant to the shopper, because even though that helps increase your pace, you're targeting like unaffiliated shoppers now, right? It doesn't really make sense from a targeting perspective, but I have seen Amazon recommendations to tell you to take that out to make it less restrictive. Not something that I'd recommend, but you might come across that. Backing out really quickly from here, there's 2 other ways to increase your pace. You can increase your pace by increasing your base supply bid, equivalent to increasing your keyword bid on search. Often also not too recommended because you're going to be increasing costs at this standpoint. So I would weigh out those options. Is this campaign already fully optimized so that, the costs are low, everything's running smoothly? Because if so, I wouldn't recommend touching it. You can increase frequency cap, however, right? The more impressions you serve, generally that's going to affect servability. But again, to the same point as base supply bid, if you're already serving to a point where you think any increase in frequency cap is just going to annoy the customer, I wouldn't recommend touching that. So canceling all those options If you're looking to increase your pace, really the only other thing that you can do is just add your strategy, add to the strategy, build more campaigns, increase your audience size, right? And that's the story that we usually share to all the brands out there. Any questions? Awesome. And then decreasing pace, it's not very common for you to overpace for a DSP campaign. It does occasionally happen, but as long as you have that flight budget set, it's almost never going to pass that, right? So unlike search, you don't have to worry about overspending on the DSP. If anything, it's going to be Amazon's fault that it overspends, and that's when they will come back to you with like make goods, come back with you or to you with like added value, and those situations. So definitely we can cross that bridge when we get there, but you are most definitely going to be overpacing or underpacing than overpacing. So I know we are at time. There's still the performance aspect of optimization, which will take a little bit longer. I'd recommend coupling that with the reporting because they kind of go hand in hand. Sometimes you have to look at reports to know what to optimize, as well as seeing poor performance and then knowing exactly what you want to optimize and pulling your reports to help you there. I recommend just saving that for the next session, but just looking at everyone's kind of timing on this. Is everyone aligned with that?
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that next week, Ryan.
Alrighty, sounds good. Then I'll go ahead and pause this recording.